if you like what you're seeing and hearing, please consider subscribing to the podcast. You can go to either Apple iTunes, the Google Play Store, Spotify, or Amazon Music in the podcast section. It'll hit Monday morning or Sunday afternoon, depending on when it posts. And the video will hit on YouTube and Spotify Monday. Spotify will hit Monday evening, and YouTube it'll hit Monday morning, 7 a.m., just like it does for the audio services. So please go to those places and consider subscribing or listening to the show. You can also write to me at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com if you want to write me a letter. Let me know what you think of the show, things like that. Or you can also find me on Twitter at JustLittleJoe. So go to those places and please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks. And with that, we'll get on to the episode. Hello, my name is Joseph Carlson. This is episode 224 of Game of Grief. I just wanted to get it right. Just like I promised last episode, Martin and I sit down and we talk about the differences between The Last of Us show and The Last of Us game, which I replayed. And yeah, we just get to compare things, and it was nice to sit down and talk to him even digitally about the differences. We had a good chat. So yeah, on to the episode. Martin, you have done something that I haven't done. You have watched all of the Last of Us series.
Oh man, I'm surprised.
I have not done that. I think what it was I watched. I think because I did an episode before this. I think what I said is I watched one episode, but I found out I watched two. And what I found was, although some things had changed in the type of the way the virus interacted with people in the show was different than the game. So in the show, it was wheat, and like the cordyceps got into the wheat, and someone had eaten wheat at a factory, and the cordyceps had grown in them. A scientist goes over there to examine it and tells the officer, whoever, the official, nuke it. Like it's not worth, get rid of all of it, basically. Right. But in the game, it was just people got sick, and then spores started to show up. And during various points in the game, you have to put a gas mask on, basically, in enclosed spaces, because spores will infect you. But obviously, Ellie is immune in the game, just like she is in the show. Right. So that's like the whole thing. So, but you've seen the whole thing. You saw the finale or whatever of the on HBO. So what did you?
I saw.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, what did you think over? Because we talked on the phone for maybe like 10 minutes about it. But what did you feel about the show itself? Since you haven't played the game, but you played the show.
Yeah, I like the show. I thought that the show started off pretty strong. It's a normal type of family type thing. Joel's on his way home, et cetera, and then something catastrophic, hits.
As it does with all families, I'm sure. His was a little bit extreme, but yeah.
Yeah, well, then the next type of scene is like he's basically running with his brother and his daughter, and all hell's broken loose, and they're just trying to escape, and then something really tragic happens to Joel, and I don't know. It does. I wish it would say maybe it did. I don't recall, but I wish it would be a little bit more specific on the time from when he lost his daughter to the time he met Ellie. Was that
in the
8
game,
years, 10 years?
In the game, there's actually a splash screen where he wakes up, and it says 10 years or something like that. So there's at least been, and then it's like a few months, or that part's really quick. So let's just say 10 years for all intents and purposes. Okay. So it's video game developers are great, but I think in the game they just give him a little bit of gray hair, which I guess for 10 years is fine. But
yeah, well, as well as I do, I think it's great is because when, look at any president, in the matter of 0 to the 4 years that they're in, their hair goes gray fast. So stress takes a lot.
Yeah,
and you can tell.
Yeah, especially with presidents, running a nation. You get 3-4 hours of sleep a night, probably.
For sure. So with Joel, I like how they portrayed all the the sandy or the salt and pepper in his beard and his hair, and I like that he's become this hardened person, and not only because of his daughter being taken from him, but he's hardened because he basically gets paid to go and scavenge and bring stuff back and other things. They keep
Yeah,
alluding to other things, but
he
they don't ever tell you what other things
yeah he does
he
in
did.
the so in the game there is a specific scene where he's with Ellie. They get a car. They're driving.
Okay.
Somebody comes out on the road is like, I'm hurt, and Ellie's like, aren't you gonna stop? And he guns it, and he says, oh, he's not even hurt. And as soon as they pass the person, the guy starts shooting at them, and then it crashes the car. They get in a big fight. I don't know if that happens in the show, but
It does.
yeah. So that's basically and later she says, how did you know? And he says, I've been on both sides of
No.
what that guy was doing. So like he is obviously turned, from this quote unquote good person that like is a construction worker or whatever. And then he meets his brother later in the game. And I just talked about this in the last episode. They have this really heart to heart where before they go to meet him, Ellie says, so why did you stop talking to your brother? And he says, I saw the world one way, he saw the world another.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, when he meets his brother, he basically says, you should help me, blah, blah, blah. And his brother says, we're not even going to talk about what happened, back in the day. And he said, I kept you alive back then. And his brother says, I have nightmares about what we did back then. Like, so it's like this whole thing of they definitely weren't good people, or
well,
at
I mean,
least,
you can't really say.
well, at least Tommy thinks,
that.
well, whatever Tommy, his brother says, this is not good. What we've got,
Yeah.
like I don't feel what we've gone is like if I'm having nightmares about what happened, then
Right.
it is
Well,
obviously not
I
good.
feel the same way about that. I think that if I was ever in that situation, I would feel the same way as Tommy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I feel both for Joel and Tommy because I believe for myself, of course we all do, don't we? Is I believe that at some point I would be Joel when I needed to be absolute Joel. But for the most part, I think that's one of those things of all the bad things that he did for profit, for money, for getting something that he wanted. Like in this case, he's the reason why he took on Ellie's case is just simply for a battery.
Yeah. And then
I think
there was some guns too in the game. He was going to get a battery and guns from I forget the head of the Fireflies, Marlene. He was going to get some stuff from her, and she said, "If you do this, I'll get your battery, your guns, whatever you want." Like, and so that's kind of like I remember that from the first episode of the show. It was pretty much
right. So I think I would be a little bit of Tommy, a little bit of Joel. I think if I did the things that Joel did on a regular basis, I think I side with Tommy in the sense that it would mess me up, and it's not just a well, cool. It would mess me up for a while, but like Joel says, I'm your bigger brother. I kept us alive, and that is in the show, by the way. When he meets up with his brother, he's like, same thing. Like, aren't we going to talk about it? He's like, no, I kept you alive, and he's like, the stuff we did was nightmare. And he's basically like, that's the way of the world now, that sort of thing. So I like that when they're trying to get a battery because they're trying to go out west or whatever the direction was, and him and Tess get wind of this job, and they're going to give them batteries and stuff like that. And it's taken Ellie to the Fireflies. So and Joel, I like the transition of Joel because right away Tess is like, it's a girl, that sort of thing, and Jess is like, no, not Jess, I apologize, but Joel's like, no, that's a package. That's not anybody that has a name. Well, don't you want to know about her? Nope.
Yeah.
That's a package. That's a means for me to get a battery so we can put it in the truck so we can get out of here, right?
Yeah, that's all that totally makes sense to me of like the admissible in court thing of like, I want to know as little as possible. We're doing this one thing. I don't want to know anything, What was the other thing? I thought Tess in the show was, even in the game, it was very quick when she gets bit and dies and all that. Okay. But I thought in the show it seemed even quicker. Like, I don't know, there was, just to let people know, I was going to look it up, but it ruined up my setup I have here. The actress that originally did the motion capture and the voice in the game, she passed away. I want to say a few months ago. She had cancer, and so
I read about that.
Yeah,
she was young.
Yeah, she was like 41 or 42.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I in the game it's so good, and I'm not saying the performance in the show because I did see the actress that played Tess, but I think it was really weird how she. I mean, obviously too, the game's like 15 hours long. the show's 8 to 10, so they're like, we have to shrink stuff or stuff gets removed. So it was kind of a bummer to see Tess kind of going away quickly. In the game, it still hits where she says, you have to do this. You have to get out of here. Just get out of here. Do what we were gonna do. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like the whole build up, because for me, movies and shows nowadays, there's no surprise. I pegged Tess being killed, and I've never played the games.
Yeah.
And she went out like a champ.
Well, and all the promotional material, even in the show, it's just Joel and Ellie. So the moment you see her in the beginning, you're like, she's not going to make it. She didn't even make it to the posters, so.
But she could have left. She could have joined the Fireflies.
Bit.
You know what I mean? She could have done anything for someone who's not played the games. But she went out like a champ. Have you been to that episode yet?
Yeah, we got the second one is when she passed away in the show, and that's where we watched and we stopped. So we saw her die basically, and then stopped watching. I don't know what it was. I think. It wasn't that I didn't want to watch a show. I think we'll watch it now that I finished playing the game and everything. I think there was a lot that was similar, and I wanted to see what was different, and I wasn't getting it yet. So we kind of walked away, but I do want to watch it now because I've heard different episodes, early on there. Well, go ahead.
They've done, like, from what you're telling me about the game, I've not played it and you've not watched the show. From what you're telling me about the game, especially the dialogue, man, it's almost on point right now.
Yeah.
Especially stuff like that. And then them picking Pascal, he looked side by side. They compared him side by side to the game, especially when him and Ellie are in the car together on their way, just before they meet that guy
Bill.
That's on the side of the road.
Oh yeah,
they did a side by side, and Pascal and Joel in the game, and even Ellie, I mean, they look very identical. But that did happen in the show. They're driving, and what I liked about it was Ellie found this book. It was a little joke book.
Oh yeah.
And so I don't know if that's in the game, but it's stupid jokes. Like,
I think there's like dialogue options, because I remember from last time, and I think there's one this time where there'll be like a prompt above her head. And if you go up and hit the prompt, she'll randomly say lines of dialogue, and sometimes they're like dad jokes, basically. Yeah. Where she's like, "Hey,"
basically that's what it is. She's like, and she just goes on, like, the first night she gets it, Joel's still looking at her as like a package, and she's just like piping off these jokes one after another, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's stuff like, I've seen a stationery store move, and Joe's like, I get it, and she's like, get it, and he's like, No, I get it. And he'll ask her, do you know what a stationery store is? And she's like, yes. And she explains it, and he goes, but you've never seen it. She's like, no, I was born and raised inside the wall. So no, I don't.
And one of the,
but she's very well versed in the world, although she's never
Well, she said something about, I think, even in the game, like, I had to go to school, like they still have a basic education. There's a thing with Sam and Henry where they're escaping, and they get to somewhere, and there's like an old ice cream truck. I don't know if that's in the show, but Sam, the young kid, was like, they just used to drive around and sell people ice cream. Henry told me about it. And Ellie's like, Joel, is that true? There's no way. And he said, yeah, it's true. They used to drive around, play crazy music, and sell you ice cream. And she's like, that's nuts, And it's like that kind of stuff of like you said, she knows about the world and has learned, but she hasn't seen it, And there's even like a poster on the wall of like a werewolf movie that Ellie's like, man, that looks crazy or whatever. And he's like, oh yeah, there's 3 of them. I saw one with somebody. And I think he's talking about Sarah, but he doesn't really bring her up that much, He didn't really want to bring her up. But he's like, yeah, I got dragged along to see one or whatever. And she's like, was it good? He's like, yeah, it was all right, and it's this idea. What I like is there's a scene with, it was before Sam and Henry, there's a scene where or maybe it's after. Oh, it's after, because he meets his brother Tommy at the dam, at the hydroelectric dam. But there's a scene where in the game, Ellie runs off because Joel just doesn't want to talk to her, just tells her to do what he says. He's very quiet. She's like, what's going on? And he's like, I'll tell you later. We'll talk later. I'll talk later. And she gets so mad, she takes one of the horses and takes off. And so you and your brother have to go find her. And then when you find her, they have this incredibly heartfelt discussion. And what I like about it is it's like, I don't know if it's in the show, but like basically he's like, why aren't you doing what I say? Blah, blah, blah. And she mentions Sarah. She's like, your brother's wife told me about Sarah. I'm not your daughter. You're not my father, but we need, like, you need, like, everybody I know has either been killed or left me, died or left me. And what I like about it is, I like about this scene is Joel's like, you don't understand what you're talking about. And that's when she says, you think you're the only one that's lost people? Her, apparently the backstory, I didn't play the prequel game, but her parents died. One of her best friends died. She saw them die, apparently. So at least her best friend. And so, Joel's story is one of this world, but how many people have gone through something that, especially when people are aggressive and will attack and kill your family, it's not just a virus where people waste away in a bed or something, or like cancer, maybe, this is like people running at you, attacking you, so it's how many people in the world have experiences like that where they lose loved ones. And I like when she says that, do you think you're not the only one here, and he, in the game, his brother says, hey, I found something at our old house. I want to give it to you. And he gives Joel a picture of Joel and his daughter, Sarah, at like a soccer game. And Joel's like, that's fine. I don't need it. And Tommy's like, really? He's like, okay, well, I'll keep it for you if you want it. And he rejects it. And then later in the game, him and Ellie go through a bunch of stuff. And it's near the end of the game. She says, hey, I took this. Don't get mad, but I want to give it to you. And she gives him the picture, and he actually takes it. So it's like this whole thing of him doing it towards the end of the game, like to show him,
So I think with that in the show and the comparison was, there was a lot right there. So where they got the horses, they were going into town and they were looking for something, and they in the show, and they got in trouble and they got attacked by a group, and the group is of the main villain's people.
right.
And so he's like, you know what, you attacked my guys. Eventually,
is that David? Is it David? Do you find out it's David probably or something?
I can't remember. It's been since the show
it was like the
came
beginning
out.
of the year when we saw the show. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're on horseback and they take off riding because there's a fight that ensues, and they didn't start the fight. But like you were talking about, like people, you think you're the only one in this world type thing. But you know as well as I do when it comes down to mental health, because that's exactly what this is, right? It's mental health and the lack of dealing with loss and trauma, and so Joel has not dealt with the loss of lack of by dealing with the loss and trauma, to where Ellie has done a very good job, especially for her age.
Well, and also, she's born into this world, right? This is all she knows.
Right.
And Joel's almost in a way like holding on to this, not to say he shouldn't and that he doesn't love his daughter, but the idea of it's an old thing to be like, I'm the only one that's gone through this. This is my burden to bear. And she's like, no, this is the world now. We have all lost people. You know?
But what I'm saying is that, you're absolutely right, especially in that day and age, is where everybody's lost and that sort of thing. But my point of that is that normal people, they don't care. Like if you and I have loved and lost, and we don't. We're friends, so I do care. I know you do also. But like if we were strangers, I really wouldn't care. Yeah, you can sympathize with me, but how you took the loss versus how I took the loss could be harder on me than it is on you. And so why Ellie says you think you're the only one, she's absolutely right. But Joel's perspective is that his pain is far greater than anybody else's. And to Joel's credit, I also agree with that, because your pain is not the same thing as my pain. So I like how both of them are dealing with it, because
like we just proved our own points. Like the world he comes from, like you said, people don't talk about it, they don't care, they don't whatever. That's the world he comes from, and so in a way you kind of I would imagine you would internalize it and say nobody cares, so I'm not going to talk about it, but it's mine, and if you disrespect it, you're disrespecting me. And Ellie's thing is like, everybody I know has died, this is just how it is. Like we have. That's why I think in the second game they go to a bigger settlement, and it's not really a spoiler. They're just in a bigger settlement. And I think it'd be great if there was at least one therapist there, somebody that was like, "Bring it in. We'll, whatever. We'll talk it out." Or,
Yeah.
I think that would be good. What was the other thing?
Why?
Oh, go ahead.
So, with that whole thing in the show is Ellie does find a picture of Joel and what's her name,
Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Um, but it wasn't given to him by his brother. It was given to him by Ellie. They were put away in his brother's home,
Oh, yeah.
and with his wife,
Right.
and they're staying the night and that sort of thing. And Ellie is very apprehensive about where she's staying, because of the things that she's seen from the moment she left till when they get to that settlement. Very leery about it, and right away she sees this picture and she snags it and she puts it away.
That's interesting.
And then later on, because she's asking about Sarah and stuff like that, and Joel's like, no, no, no. Well, eventually she gives the picture and is like, I apologize. But during this whole time, Tess was telling him, you probably should open up. And then his brother's like, you should probably, open up. And it gets to this point, like you were saying, that there's the part where they have a heart to heart. Well, Joel finally, toward the end, says, let me tell you something. And he tells Ellie about Sarah and stuff like that. And
that's interesting. That's an interesting way to
yeah,
do that. Did
yeah,
did the Sam and Henry thing happen in the show as well? The two brothers
yeah,
that
yeah.
one of them in the game, one of them gets bit,
Yes,
and he attacks Ellie.
the younger brother.
Right, and so Henry's the older brother. I think he shoots Sam off Ellie, and then
Right.
there's an incredibly and that's so in the game it's like spring, summer,
Yeah.
fall, winter. After that event, after Henry shoots himself, it cuts to winter. Wait, does it? Yeah, I just played it. I'm trying to think because it was like two big scenes. It basically cut to winter or fall. No, it cut to fall. That's it. It cut to fall. So the season, it's like a hard cut of it just says fall on the screen. And so then they go to the university and they're trying to find the fireflies. That really doesn't work out.
Yeah.
And they have to go to somewhere else.
So between that is so um, they're driving. Ellie and Joel are driving, and she's like, "Aren't you going to stop?" He's like, "No, I've seen this." And sure enough, they get ambushed. But by the time they get ambushed when they make it to town. And there's this chick that I can't remember her name. I looked her up.
Yeah, they added
She's
her
been in
for
quite
the
a few
show,
movies.
I believe.
Okay, but I can't. They didn't give her name when I looked it up.
Yeah.
But basically, she's taken over the city, and she's helping it run. But she's on a personal mission, and she's lost all sense of actual control. And so Joel and Ellie get into this firefight. Joel basically takes out everybody, and it's only of like 5 people. And then Ellie watches as he gets to this it's basically a fist fight for survival. And then Ellie takes the life of this guy to help and save Joel. And then that's when Joel asks, it's hard for your first time, and she's like, "Who's to say it was my first time?"
Yeah.
And so they're running, hiding and running and that sort of thing from this group of people. And that's when they meet Henry and
Sam and Henry.
Yeah, and they creep up on him. They break glass everywhere, and somehow Henry and Sam creep around everything because they're staying, and they find him, take him hostage, interrogate him. Come to find out is that the lady that's running the city, she's after Henry and Sam. And she's doing every means possible by trying to find him. And the people that work for her, especially her right-hand man, is like, "Listen, the amount of people and resources you're exhausting is starting to get a little out of hand. We just don't have the readily available for this." So, nevertheless, her downfall was the fact that she was going after Ellie and Joel, and that's when...
was it more of like
trying to escape?
Was it more of like a vendetta of like, he's killed so many of my men, we have to take him out type thing, or?
No, she was after Sam and Henry, and I can't recall why. I think the older brother
Yeah, Henry.
Henry. I believe he turned in like her husband or lover or something like that, in which it
Oh.
turned out to be that he died or her brother or something, and so now she's got a personal vendetta for Henry. So the four of them, Joel, Ellie, Henry, Sam, they take off, and as they take off, just before they take off, the lady that's running the city and the right hand man,
Mm.
he comes back and says, "Hey, they're tunneling," and you don't know what that means,
Mm.
you know. And so she's like, "Board it up, block it up, don't tell anybody." And he's like, "Well, we got to," and she's like, "No, until we find Henry and Sam, don't tell anybody." Well, bittersweet. They're headed after all four of them, and just before they're going to come down on them hard, Joel's up in the bell tower, covering them, and sure enough, this tunnel just comes out of nowhere, and the infected just come out of
Yeah.
everywhere, and so they were able to get away. But during that encounter is when Sam was bit,
Mm.
and then later that night, Ellie is slicing her hand open, and she's trying to pour her blood into Sam's bite
Oh.
because she's thinking, hey, you know what? If I was bit, I'm not turned. Maybe my blood is the healing, and
Right.
maybe my blood I can pour it into that. And so she starts doing that, and then she wakes up, and he's turned,
Yeah.
and she all of them come in. She's fighting Sam, and Henry is just like, no, that's my brother. Points a gun at Joel, blah blah blah. And just before he leaps at Ellie, he blasts him, and then he, without even thinking, and he's just like, "What have I done?" But it just shows that for him, I think for me, it just like he was watching this whole thing unfold, and he knew at some point that his brother now was not human, and he
Right.
was trying to save his friend, and he reacted without thinking. And then right there, he took his own life also. And
Yeah.
then it pans to, in the show, I believe it pans to really fall just on the cusp of winter, and
Mm.
shortly after that is when they found his brother.
Yeah, like in the game, they don't really have a big bad out in the world. It's just, scavengers and people. But what happens is some people find some military trucks with guns on them, and that is like the
Yeah,
big protagonist. They do, a lot of chases out of areas in the game of, we got to get out of this area. You can't fight the truck, you just got to run. And they're escaping with Sam and Henry. You get a sniper rifle up in a room, but the truck breaks through a wall down this like cul-de-sac, and you take the truck out, but then people are coming and you're taking people out with a sniper rifle. Then a bunch of infected come out, and then you see a scuffle, and you're looking at it far away, so you don't know if anybody got bit. You're just shooting everybody off them. And then that night, he gets bit, turns. And then the only big bad in the game is David, who you meet in winter in the game. It's Joel and Ellie. I don't know if this happened in
the
the show, but Joel
what,
gets
the
hurt.
religious guy.
Yeah, Joel gets.
Yeah,
He's not very religious in the game. You just know he's kind of creepy.
yeah,
He's too calm. He's like, because in the game, Joel and Ellie are at the university. They're trying to find the fireflies. Joel gets pushed over a ledge and gets stabbed with like a rusty piece of metal, and basically goes into like a quasi coma. Ellie, he's still alive in a house. They hold up in a house. It's winter. She's trying to hunt. She's out on her own. She runs into David and his people, and she downs a buck. And David's like, "We'll trade." He comes out
yeah,
of the woods basically,
yep.
and then
It happens exact same way in the
yeah,
show.
and she says, he says, "What do you need?" And the moment he mentions medicine, she goes, "Medicine. I need medicine." And then a bunch of stuff happens, and basically she gets kidnapped because David isn't religious, but he's like, everything happens for a reason. And then she gets knocked out and kidnapped, wakes up in their hometown that they've
Mhm.
cordoned off, and there's somebody there cutting
Yep,
a
meat.
cadaver. Yeah,
Hmm.
and she figures out the whole thing and
Hmm.
gets out, and then says, "I'm infected," because they're gonna cut her. And then she gets out of that, and then Joel obviously wakes up from his quasi coma because she did give him the medicine before she got kidnapped. And it's basically like you meet in the middle. He goes to find her. He finds one of David's guys, tortures him, figures out where they're at, and they meet in the
Yep,
middle. She has a big fight with David where she stabs him in the back a bunch of times in the game, and everything burns down. Joel gets her, and
yep,
they leave and go to the hospital.
yep.
Is kind of like,
That's That's basically what happened in
The
the
show.
show.
Yeah.
But some minor things. But yeah, he did get stabbed. But Joel got stabbed when he was fighting with David's guys
Oh
in
yeah.
town
Yeah.
when they were on horses, and Ellie stashes him away, and she
Yeah.
goes gets the buck
Yeah. That's basically.
because just before that they head out of the encampment where Joel's brother is, and Joel's
Right.
brother hands him like basically a newer rifle,
Yeah.
and says,
They
"Hey,
they do a
we'll see
weird
you when
thing
you
just
get
like they
back."
do because this is the same developer of Uncharted. So you do go to places where there's like a corpse and they're holding onto a shotgun, and then you pick it up. It's like you now have the shotgun. You know, you're like, oh okay, and then you can upgrade it
Yeah.
and stuff like that. That's how in the game you do it. One of the weapons was actually in Uncharted, which they said they put it in there to be like an homage. I think it's the Double. It's pretty much a sawed-off shotgun, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and the end. Everybody always talks about the end of the show, or the end of the game. You know.
Well, before you get into that, before you get into the end of the game, there was episode 3. You know, the big controversy episode.
Oh yeah, with Bill.
I think it was episode. Yeah, Bill and Frank. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the gay couple. Um, I will say that for me, I don't understand why that was in the show, regardless of what the writers and the directors and the producers, the reason why they put it in there.
Yeah.
But in the sense of why it was in the show, to me, it didn't make sense why it was in the show because that's not what the show was about.
Right.
I do like the
It
fact
it
that it
seems like
was
there were
in the
certain
show
episodes.
because it was.
I think there were certain episodes that wanted to expand upon the world because in the game, when you run into Bill, he owes you. You go through the thing, blah blah blah. He
Yep.
doesn't want you to be there, and he
Yep.
mentions that he did have a partner, and I don't know how it happens in the show, but in the game, you literally. He's like, yeah, I don't know what happened to him, and then obviously infected chase you. You run into this suburb. You get into a home, and you have this scuffle, and then he gets real quiet, and Joel says, "Who's that?" And somebody hung himself, and he said, "That's Frank." And Frank hung himself, and apparently, and you could just see Bill just like I didn't know what happened to him, and this is how I find out. He's hanging from a rafter, basically,
Mm.
and you're just like,
So in
oh man, like that's rough, No matter whatever, it's like I thought I loved this person, and they just ended their life. So
So in the show, it started off. This guy has basically built his own commune, just him. And he can cook and clean and solar power, fresh water.
by the way, Nick Offerman very handy. Apparently, he probably built the set before they showed up to film.
Uh,
Yeah,
just what he did was just unremarkable. And to come to find out that the stuff he was doing with the entire commune, he did not even have a background in. So the fact that he was able to purify his own water, uh, put up electric fences, and he wasn't even an engineer. So that was, but the whole thing is like him and Frank. It was just refreshing that two people find themselves. You know what I mean? And
well, I mean,
they did
just
live
to find love in a situation like that, where you think this is my life, I'm gonna have to do patrols every night and kill these
yeah.
cordyceps, whatever.
Well,
That yeah,
he was completely. So Bill was completely relying on himself. He grew his own vegetables. He went and hunted his own meat. He had an arsenal downstairs, which he kept his guns immaculate condition from hoarding. Like he would go out and bring stuff back, or he would go to Home Depot type things and bring stuff back, and that's how he created
right,
everything. Well, he
right.
ends up finding this guy, gives him a home. He's basically telling him you got to leave, and then they end up falling in love, and then they bring in Joel and Tess, and they tie that together,
Oh,
and
so they knew
so
them from
they met each
before.
other along the way.
So they
So Frank ran into Tess, and they started talking,
oh,
and this is during everything that's already gone down,
right,
and way before Ellie.
right.
And so Tess and Frank became friends,
Mm-hmm.
and Bill was already in a relationship, and so they're all sitting at the table. Really great scene. They're all sitting at the table, and you know, uh, Tess and Joel would bring them stuff.
Oh,
And in turn, they would give them like a meal and that sort of thing.
right.
And that's how that whole thing started. And then they became friends. Basically, Frank and Tess became friends. And he's like, oh, thankfully, someone I could talk about decorating and food
Oh,
and
right,
stuff like that.
right.
And so
somebody who's cultured, like this guy that's coming around all the time. Yeah.
Right. And so they take off, and it's just Joel and Bill at the table, and they're just staring at each other. And Joel's trying the best that he can to be good, and like Bill's just mad dogging him the entire time, right? And so they finally leave, and he's just like basically telling him how long do you have until you get out of here? And Joel's like, I wanted to leave the moment I got here, type thing. And then
I never liked you, bonding. Basically. She liked you. I never liked you.
I don't trust you. I don't trust your girl Tess. I don't even know why. If it wasn't for Frank, you wouldn't be sitting at my table. And like not Frank, but Bill says something like, if it wasn't for them, that I'd pretty much mow you down.
Like they vouch for you, but they're no longer here. So
yeah. And Joel says something kind of like that, and he basically tells him, "You probably want to put your gun away so I can put mine away." And so Joel's gun's been on him the entire time underneath the table.
And Bill had a gun on him as well.
Right. And that's when like Bill like smiled and smirked, and he's like, "You want a beer?" type thing. And he's just like, I could use one. And then later on, they come back, and they're just doing stuff for him. Hey, when you go back out in the world, this is what I need. They'd come back, and it just kept rehashing. Hey, man, thanks. Whatever happened to Tess? Nah, she didn't make it this round. She was still alive, but she didn't make it this time.
Right, make it over to see you or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And how's Frank? Frank's good. That sort of thing. And he's like, here, your stuff. And he goes, that's great. I don't like you anyway. And then they basically smile at each other and walk away. Well,
I still don't like you.
At the end of the show, how it happened was, I believe Bill got really sick, or Frank got really sick. I can't remember which one. And
Bill's the one who survives in the game, so I imagine he's still. I think Nick
Frank.
Yeah. So
Frank got really sick because he's old.
Right.
They lived together until they were old.
Yeah.
And died of like cancer or natural age. I can't remember. And that was all.
Or having a bad flu back or in that world, it could be deadly. It's like, well, this is it.
Well, the amount of stuff that Bill probably had on hand, he probably didn't. So Bill decided that in the show that he couldn't live without Frank anymore. And so Bill hung himself. And
so they kind of like cut that story, and that's interesting. Like, I just think it was. I don't know what was going to happen to Bill, because in the game, you need the battery. You go to Bill, and after all this, he's like, "I'll give you your battery. Just get out of here." Basically, like, you've caused me enough. Like, he had booby traps all over where he was living. He's like, "Oh, my booby traps are gone. I've wrecked. I got to start all over again. Just get out of here. We're square." Because in the game, Joel's like, he owes me a favor. He tells her, this guy owes me a favor, which apparently he did. But obviously, going through all that, I'm sure he's like, we're paid. You know what I mean? It's like, we're paid up. So, yeah. I mean, yeah.
So they what happens is Joel ends up going back and finding their bodies, and they've been dead for a while.
Yeah.
And Joel finds a note that Bill left him, saying, hey man, if you ever see this is what happened. Feel free to stay. Feel free that if you don't stay, take whatever you want. And he said, the arsenal is down below. Here's the code to get in.
Oh, nice. That's actually a mechanic of the game when you find like safe combinations, and it gives you extra material. So it's kind of interesting that they weave that into the show.
Yeah. So he goes, and then at the end of the letter, it says again, by the way, I've never liked you. And so the thing I don't understand about shows like this, games like this, including The Walking Dead, Joel goes downstairs, and there's an arsenal, man. I mean, there's ARs, M16s, there's automatic shotguns, pump shotguns, 9 mils, SIGs, that sort of thing. And Joel takes a bolt action, like 5-round rifle, and there's ARs, AR-10s down there that have.
There's like military duffel bags that he could pack a couple with.
Seriously,
and that's
hand grenades. Right. And Joel, just like in The Walking Dead, he takes a bolt-action rifle, like a revolver with ammo, and I'm going, what in the world are you...
That feels like that...
What are you doing?
I feel that that's too much in service of the game, of like, these are the things he had in the game, so he has to have this in the show,
Correct.
As opposed to, what would be the most beneficial for a real live person to take in this situation so he could survive or they could survive or whatever, you know?
Right. And I just don't understand it. Even in a game setting, I understand they bled it into the game because that's what he had in the game. But when you have that uh, capability of having these sort of things, he even had vests. You're going to put on a military grade vest. You're
Yeah.
going to grab magazines. You're
Yeah.
going to fill that. Even if you don't do that, you're actually going to put them away in a bag. He
Yeah.
didn't grab extra, like an extra shotgun, that sort of thing. It just never made sense. But the end the end of that episode was pretty cool, just because they basically just lived out their long years together with almost no issues at all. The infected never made it out there.
Right.
And if they did, it was so minimal.
They did that in the game where there were certain parts and places you get to that are so remote. They're like, well, there may be a bandit or marauder or something, but really the infected aren't out here. It was really, you ran into the infected towards the end when you went to the medical college to find the fireflies. They ran into a bunch there. And I think Joel said something about, Ellie's like, why would they still be here if fireflies are here? Wouldn't they clear everything out? And I think Joel says something to the effect of, oh, maybe they're a deterrent for other people. If the clickers and stuff are around, people weren't going to look around. Which I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. I will say everybody talks about the end. And I was thinking about it. You and I talked on the phone a couple minutes after you saw the end. And, there's a lot of information that had to be covered by the developer or the writer, Neil Druckmann, after the game came out, even of like, oh, the Fireflies plan would have worked. They would have been able to distribute the vaccine to people. But like, I remember telling you that on the phone and you said, I didn't know any of that. That wasn't in the show. It wasn't presented to me. How would I have known that? So that changes your perception of, and then Ellie says in the game flat out, which she might say in the show, but like they're getting to the hospital. She starts getting really quiet. And she knows this is like the final destination. And Joel goes, what's happening? And she says, well, this can't all be for nothing. This has to be for something. And she goes, if I can help, I want to help. But I don't think when he's talking to the Fireflies in the end, they tell him the extent of what they're going to do, but I don't think they tell her. I think she's just going in. I think she just thinks she's going in for tests. Like they're going to take a blood sample. Maybe they'll take a fingernail or some of my skin.
That's what it was, is that they were going to do just that. But they talked to the main medical guy, and he said something like,
we need her brain, basically.
There's no reason to even chance it. Let's take everything.
Oh.
And then there was like a moment between the doctor and something like, yeah, but you'll kill her. And he's like, yeah, but who will she save? And Joel finds out about that. So yeah, basically,
but did they not?
All I need is a little bit.
Did they not tell Ellie in the show?
I don't recall,
because that's one thing I couldn't even find in the game. Because in the game they prep her for surgery, and maybe she thought, this is the world she's grown up in. Maybe she thought, oh, they're just going to do a medical exam. Yeah, maybe they're going to. I don't know that. I don't know how this goes. Like maybe they're going to knock me out for a blood sample. I don't know. But like, everybody, a lot of people said after the game and like the dust settled of like, well, just ask her, and ask her like, hey, before you put her under, be like, hey, we're doing a lot of math research. We got a bunch of tests. We need your brain, meaning this is what's going to happen. Like a consult, like a doctor would do, and then let her make up her mind. But
well, and that's what I hate about at the end of the show. People from the game came out, and even people that didn't play the game, like myself, and watched it, and they were like, Joel never even gave her an option. And now that you say that, it's like, yeah, but neither did the doctor.
Yeah, the Fireflies. I don't think unless there was. I think there's like a tape recorder you find in a desk. They have those digital tape recorders, but to be honest, I would have to go through and watch the specific event because, like any book or movie that I finish, if I get towards the end, I just jut towards the end. And in that scene, which I'm sure it's in the show, he's shooting a bunch of guys trying to get to her and prepping her for surgery. So I was just gunning people down and running. I stopped and found ammo in a room. I just kept going. I didn't be like, well, let me find all the collectibles. I just had like tunnel vision to go get her, basically.
Right. And so, when they take her in, and Joel is going after her, because I think that was part of the thing, is that they didn't give her a choice, and so Joel just went after her. And I know that people were like, I don't think he made the right decision. She could have saved the world. First of all, the thing that I was thinking of is that I think Joel made the best decision.
Well, yeah,
And I
he
think
doesn't
Joel
know too. Like, who are the
right,
Fireflies? They've been broken apart. Like, do they
right,
have some kind of distribution thing? I mean, this
right,
isn't 100%, and if it's not
right.
100%, then don't do it. You know?
Well, he's also making that decision for himself.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
not making that
obviously,
decision
yeah,
for anybody else. But the whole thing is that he's been in the world for 10 years the
right,
way it is,
right,
and they have promised multiple things that have never come to
yeah.
fruition. And so what's this? This is
What's
just basically another
the
promise.
15th time or the 200th time
Right.
that somebody said
Right.
like we got it, and you're like, no, you
Right.
don't.
And so in Joel's defense, and I think that's something that they don't ever explore, is that she could have been the cure, absolutely, but she could have also not been the cure.
Yeah,
She could have completely died, and it could have been that for some reason it just worked with her, and there's not enough of a sample or whatever to
or
do anything
the
with.
limited amount of people that are surviving don't have the knowledge base where they are,
Right,
or how would they transfer samples to another facility? There's all these
right.
logistical questions.
Right, and so I think that's one thing they don't explore. Nor is that something else that people thought about.
Right.
Was that because people just think, hey, if you're the one sole survivor from a bite type thing, then of course you're the cure.
Well,
But
I'll say
at the
this
same
though.
time, you could be the survivor, but you could not be the cure
Right.
also.
Well, I don't know about the show, but in the game, he does lie to her twice at the end,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they're driving. Does he shoot Marlene in the show? The head of the Fireflies.
I believe he does. I believe he kills
Well,
everybody.
it's crazy because she comes back after him. He makes his way through the facility with Ellie. The head of the Fireflies stops him with a gun and says, "Listen, you can still do the right thing. Put her down. She's still out. We'll put her back on the table. You're damning everybody basically." And he's got a gun. He's holding Ellie, but he has a gun underneath, like holding a gun and then
Yes.
holding Ellie.
Yep.
And he shoots her,
Same thing.
and then she's bleeding out. And he puts Ellie in the car, and she's Marlene's like bleeding out, and he goes up to her and she says, "Please don't shoot me or whatever. We'll let you go." And he goes, "It'll just be somebody else," and he shoots her. That's like what he does in the game. And then
Yeah, and that's basically what happened in
when
the
he's
show.
driving away with Ellie, she wakes up and says, "What happened?" Because she's under
Yep.
anesthesia, and he says, "It turns out, you're one of dozens of people and they haven't been able to figure it out yet, so it didn't work." And so she gets
Yeah.
really bummed out and doesn't talk. And then they're going to, I think, Jackson, Wyoming, I think.
Yeah.
And she stops him, and it's the last shot of the game. She says, "Swear to me that you're telling me the truth, and they couldn't do this. That they tried and they couldn't." And he looks right at her and he says, "I swear they couldn't do it." So he lied to her really, and
Right.
that's where the
Right.
game ends. That's where the first game ends. It's like the end of the game, and you see credits after that.
Yeah, so that's where it ends also. So I think you should watch it. I
I
think
do.
that
I
you'll
want to
be
see the
pleasantly
differences. I
surprised
want to
about it.
see I want to see the different scenes and see what they chose. Again, there wasn't a big bad. I want to see how David's different because apparently in the show they make him religious, and I didn't.
Yeah,
Again, I don't.
he's highly religious, but he's religious because of power. And so it's like he's running a Mormon cult.
Mm,
So he wants Ellie because some weirdness in him, he has come to like love her in a short
right.
period. So he wants her to bear his children and help
That's
him
that's only a
rule.
few.
And
That's only a few lines of dialogue in the game, but it's portrayed so well that you understand that whatever he wants is very creepy, and then
yes,
when
yes,
Ellie kills him, you're kind of like, oh, that guy was, you know what I mean, like, because he says
yeah,
something about all he really says in the game is about her being special, and she looks
right,
at him and it's animated amazing and the performance is good where she kind of realizes what he wants. He wants like a
right,
plaything or whatever, and so
right.
it's really effective. I'll say I said this in the last episode. It's one of the last. It was still, no matter what I think about the end, good, bad, whatever. I always like having these conversations because it's like, what did you think? What did you think? And it sparks conversation, which is probably the best
Yeah,
thing about any media, whatever. The worst thing is to be the best thing in the world, where you're like 10 out of 10, no notes, or
yeah,
I never want to talk about or think about that movie again, 1 out of 10. burn that film from existence or book or whatever. I just don't want it to exist. The ones where you're like, I don't know what, it was, the narrative was clear, but I don't know what I would have done. What, what he did was right. Should they have told her? Would she backed away at that moment if she would, all that stuff. And they explore that more in the second game, which it'll be, I want to see how because the second game is actually a much longer game and there's more characters. So I want to see how they take that and translate it into a show. Of course, with the writer's strike, we'll have to wait much longer to find out what happens. But yeah, I mean,
they could be almost done with it. To be honest with you, we just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know where in the process they were when the strike started. And plus, even if they finish writing it, there's no actors, so like they don't have anybody to. They could have finished writing it and been like, well, now we just gotta wait for the actors. Whatever. I don't know. But I'm kind of glad we did this because, like I said, I wanted to get the different perspective of you. It's been 10 years since the game's been out, and it took this long to get the show on, to make a show out of it. So I want to see, I'm interested to see different people's interpretation, where it's basically the same general notes, but it has changed. So thanks for doing it. And since you haven't played the game, it's perfect. And then now I think months ago I did a thing about The Last of Us 2, and then we talked about it in a bar. And you're like, well, I haven't played the game. And, well, you kind of have now. You kind of played it in a way. So, you're like, well, that's it. That's the game. You just don't have to hit X to open a door or reload or whatever. So you're not missing much. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a good show. I definitely, I really liked it. I think that it's a different spin on, zombies, for lack of a better term. And I will say the way they were infected wasn't just like wheat and that sort of thing, but also, they would climb on them, and then you would see these spores start to reach out.
Yeah, that was changed for the show. There was some big nerd controversy about that, but I think the writer of the game and the showrunner said that they started to do a little bit more research, or maybe it was an idea that was in the game that they couldn't get to work because how do you show that in a game? But they're like, oh, we could do this. We have a different, this is a new way to show this. We could do this in the show. We could do wide shots. They figured it out, something like that. Or maybe a new idea of like, hey, we were kind of, because I went to PAX years ago after the first game came out. Carla and I had beaten it. And there was two writers, Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley. Neil Druckmann was there, and they were giving a panel presentation on the original draft of the game and what would have went down. And they were kind of going through bullet points, and they had a presentation. And it was fascinating, but I remember that event forever because all in there were signs like no flash photography, don't bring your cameras in. This is like, you're getting a sneak peek basically. Like this is all our internal stuff. And someone took photos of the whiteboard, and they were in the front row, and if looks could kill, the writers just immediately spinning and seeing the flash go off. I was like, oh, man, that's nice. Bold to do that when you see signs all over that say no flash photography, and you think, well, I'll be fine, and you do it in the middle of and just the look on their face of like, where did that come? It was bad. But I'm glad we did this, Martin. I'm glad we both got to talk about how the show and everything was different. Like I said, I wanted to play the game. It had been 10 years. I'll say this, I enjoyed the first game more than I did the second one. Not that the second one's bad, but it is long, and I'll just say it'll be more difficult to bring that to a series because there's a lot of stuff you got to work out, and there's going to be a lot of whiteboards on the second show. So, but thanks for joining me, Martin.
Thanks for having me.
I'm trying to think of what else. We'll have you. I'll have you on the show again. I always have you on the show every 6 months. Maybe it could be before that, but yeah, I mean, with the power of the internet, you could be on at any time.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, have a good night, Martin. Thanks for joining me.
All right, brother. You too.